Thank you so much for that introduction. And it's good to be here. And I'd like to start by congratulating the Family Research Council on the launch of its Center for Biblical Worldview, because that's what I'm speaking about this morning. My goal is to give you the tools to debunk the negative stereotypes of the Christian worldview that are so common today, and to turn the tables to show that it's actually the secular worldview that is dehumanizing, that it expresses a low view of the dignity and value of the human body. And let's start with the issue where the low value placed on the body is most obvious: the transgender movement. Transgender activists say explicitly that your gender identity has nothing to do with your biological sex. A BBC documentary. Where are my slides? My slides are not working. Okay, there you go. That's my opening slide. And I've been asked to speak about my book, Love Thy Body, which covers many of the cutting-edge social issues of our day. So my first example of transgender activism is, okay, there you go. BBC video that features a young woman telling teenagers, it doesn't matter what living meat skeleton you've been born in, it's what you feel that defines you. So your body has been reduced to a meat skeleton. A BBC documentary says that the heart of the debate is the idea that your mind can be at war with your body. And in that war, it's the mind that wins. Jessica Savano is a male-to-female transsexual who planned a documentary to be titled, "I Am Not My Body." That title says it all. Your body is not part of your authentic self. So as a result, children down to kindergarten are being estranged from their own body. The television program Blue's Clues, did you guys see this when it happened? It was just, several weeks ago. Told children essentially that the biology gives no clues to their identity. The trend is even reaching down to newborns. With gender-neutral parenting, a Facebook page says point blank, there's no such thing as biological sex. Sure, people have chromosomes and bodies, chromosomes, and genitals, but calling this sex is a social construction rather than a biological fact. Where is this biology denial coming from? It's coming from a postmodern worldview that started in gender studies courses in college campuses. Postmodern thinkers say their goal is to denaturalize gender, which means to deny that it has any grounding in nature. The result is a radically divided, fractured, fragmented view of what it means to be a human being. Philosophers sometimes illustrate using the metaphor of a building with two stories, where your gender can actually contradict your biology. What should our response be to such an extreme devaluation of the body? We should ask, why accept such an extreme devaluation of the body? I read an interview with a 14-year-old girl who had lived as a trans boy for 3 years, from age 11, and then detransitioned and reclaimed her identity as a girl. She said, the turning point came when I realized it's not conversion therapy to learn to love your body. So even secular people are starting to say that transgender ideology is body hatred. What this means is that Christians have a wonderful opportunity to show that a biblical ethic is based on a high view of the body. Our body is the handiwork of the Creator, and we are meant to honor it, to respect it, and live in accord with it. What about homosexuality? It expresses the same postmodern worldview that devalues the body. Think of it this way: even my homosexual friends agree that on the level of biology, physiology, anatomy, chromosomes, males and females are counterparts to one another. That's how the human sexual and reproductive system is designed. To embrace a same-sex identity, then, is implicitly to contradict that design. It's to say, why should my body inform my identity? Why should my biological sex as male or female have any say in my moral choices. We need to help people to see that this is a profoundly disrespectful view of the body. It pits the mind against the body and says it's only the mind and feelings that count. So again, the postmodern worldview expresses a division or dichotomy that denigrates the body. And again, our response should be, why accept such a demeaning view of the body? The Christian ethic is holistic. Our minds and emotions are meant to be in tune with our body, in harmony with our biological sex. Now, some people argue that sexual orientation is determined by our biology, but science does not support that claim. We can quote the American Psychological Association here. No findings have emerged that permit scientists to conclude that sexual orientation is determined by any particular factor, whether genetic or cultural. In my book, Love Thy Body, I tell the story of a young man named Sean, who used to be exclusively attracted to the same sex. Today, he is married and has 3 children. What changed? Sean says, I realized that as a man, God's original intention for me in creation was to be able to relate sexually to a woman. This remained true quite irrespective of whatever feelings I might have. So he did not try to change his feelings directly, which rarely works. Instead, he says, my goal was to acknowledge what I already had, a male body, as a good gift from God. And eventually my feelings started to follow suit. In other words, he accepted his embodied existence as fundamentally good. And this is the question really that's at the core of this debate. Do we live in a cosmos operating by blind material causes, or a cosmos created by a loving creator, which is therefore intrinsically good? In fact, ultimately, it's your view of nature that drives your ethics, because our bodies are part of nature. The secular ethic derives from the theory that nature is a product of mindless, purposeless forces. And therefore, the body has no intrinsic purpose, and the mind can do with it whatever it wants. In fact, that's exactly how homosexuality is defended by a well-known lesbian and feminist named Camille Paglia. Paglia rejects the idea that sex is just a social construction. No, she said, nature made us male and female. In her words, our sexual bodies were designed for reproduction. So how does she defend being lesbian? She says, and these are her words, why not defy nature? Fate, not God, has given us this flesh. We have absolute claim to our bodies and may do with them as we see fit. Do you see the logic? If our bodies are products of mindless, purposeless forces, then they have no intrinsic purpose that we are morally obligated to respect. They give no clue to our identity. They convey no moral message. We may do with them as we see fit. By contrast, a Christian worldview says God designed the world for a purpose. It's evident to observation that living things are structured for a purpose. Eyes are for seeing, ears are for hearing, wings are for flying, and fins are for swimming. The development of the entire organism is directed by an inbuilt genetic plan or blueprint. So science itself gives evidence that nature exhibits a design, a plan, an order. And what Christians are saying is that when we live in harmony with that design, we will be happier and healthier. In my book, I tell the story of a young woman named Jean, who lived as a lesbian for many years, and today is married and has 2 children. She says, I finally came to trust that God made me female for a reason, and I wanted to honor my body by living in accord with the Creator's design. What Christians are making the positive argument that biblical morality respects, honors the body. The biological correspondence between male and female is not some evolutionary accident. It is part of the original creation that God pronounced very good. When people read my book, Love Thy Body, what they find most surprising is that the same worldview also applies to the life issues like abortion and euthanasia, a worldview that devalues the body. This is easiest to see if we start with an example. A few years ago, an article appeared by a British broadcaster who said she had always been proudly pro-choice until she became pregnant with her own baby. And then she began to struggle. She writes, "I was calling the life inside me a baby because I wanted it. But if I hadn't wanted it, I would think of it as just a group of cells that it was okay to kill." She realized that didn't make sense. A fetus doesn't become a baby just because somebody wants it. So she began to research the subject and eventually reached this conclusion. She said, "In the end, I have to agree that life begins at conception. But perhaps the fact of life is not what's important. It's whether that life has grown enough to start becoming a person." So what's happened here to the concept of the human being? It's been split into two parts. If you can be human life at one point, but not a person until sometime later, then clearly these are two different things. So we can use our two-story metaphor again. In the lower story, most professional bioethicists today agree that life begins at conception. The evidence from science, from genetics and DNA, is just too strong to deny it. Just read any embryology textbook. So how do they get around the science? They argue that merely being human is not enough to qualify for legal protection. The fetus has to earn the right to life by becoming a person, defined in terms of mental abilities, a certain level of self-awareness, cognitive functioning, and so on. This is called Personhood Theory. What's the most obvious problem with it? No one can agree on how to define personhood. Many say a fetus becomes a person sometime before birth, but others say no, not until after birth. Peter Singer, an ethics professor at Princeton, says, quote, "Even a 3-year-old is a gray area." So when the concept of personhood is separated from science, it becomes arbitrary. And every bioethicist draws the line at a different place, depending on their private views and values, their personal preferences. By contrast, when personhood is rooted in biology, then we have a marker of personhood that is objective and empirically testable, something we can identify scientifically. So to be pro-science is to be pro-life. What are some practical strategies that we can use to address these issues? First, we need to be proactive. We need to stand against public schools and the media that are indoctrinating children, especially those who don't fit gender stereotypes. Studies find that the strongest correlate of both same-sex orientation and transgender identity, far stronger than any genetic link, is simply children who are gender nonconforming. To cite just one study, children who grow up to be non-heterosexual are substantially more gender nonconforming than children who grow up to be heterosexual, a finding that has been consistently and repeatedly replicated. Today, these children are under enormous pressure to identify as gay or trans, or at least non-binary. In Love Thy Body, I tell the story of Brandon, a boy who suffered from gender dysphoria from a very young age. Before he was even walking, his babysitter told his mother, "He's too good to be a boy," by which she meant he was quiet, gentle, compliant, and the things we normally associate with girls. When he was in preschool, invariably, he played with the little girls and not the little boys. By middle school, he was coming to his parents weeping repeatedly and saying, "I feel the way girls do. I'm interested in the things girls are. God should have made me a girl." By age 14, he was scouring the internet for information on sex change surgery. So what did his parents do? First, they made sure he knew they loved him just the way he was. They told him it is perfectly acceptable to be a gentle, emotional, sensitive boy. It did not mean he was really a girl. His parents' favorite line was, "It's not you that's wrong, it's the stereotypes that are wrong." Eventually, Brandon did make peace with his biological identity. He told me, "I realized surgery would not give me what I wanted. It would not make me a girl." There's a popular TED Talk by a cardiologist, and the most famous line is, "Every cell has a sex." Men and women are different down to the cellular and molecular level. And obviously, it's impossible to change every cell in your body. So the first strategy is reach out especially to these at-risk children. After all, feelings can change and often do, but the body is a physical fact that does not change. And so it makes sense to treat it as a reliable marker of gender identity. Second strategy, make allies. Many feminists oppose transgender ideology. If anyone can claim to be a woman, regardless of their physical anatomy, then the word has no meaning. To protect women's rights, we must be able to say what a woman is. If sex is a social construction, then it becomes impossible to argue for rights based on the sheer fact of being biologically female. We cannot legally protect a category of people if we cannot identify that category. As a result, Christians and feminists, liberals and conservatives are forming alliances. For example, Hands Across the Aisle Coalition, which I'm a part of. In all of these issues, we are often asked, how do other people's choices affect you? Why not just let them live the way they want? The answer is that when laws are changed, that affects everyone. So the third strategy is to focus on protecting pre-political rights. A free society is possible only if it recognizes certain rights as pre-political. That means the state does not create them. It merely recognizes them as pre-existing, sometimes called natural law. And many of our pre-political rights are rooted in biology. So when the law dismisses biology, we lose those rights. Take abortion. The right to life is the most fundamental of all, the right not to be killed. It's a right you have just because you're a member of the human race. But the only way the state could legalize abortion was to rule that some humans are not legal persons worthy of protection, which means the state has claimed the authority to decide which humans qualify as persons with a right to live, based not on biology, but on its own legal fiat. Marriage is a pre-political right. It's based on the fact that men and women naturally come together to form families. Humans are a sexually reproducing species. But the only way the state could treat same-sex couples the same as opposite-sex couples was to deny the biological component of marriage and to redefine it as a purely emotional commitment. And that's what the Supreme Court did in its Obergefell decision legalizing same-sex marriage. But we have lots of emotional commitments. So the state, whoops, I'm sorry. That's my title slide. Wait, no, I'm going backwards or something. What's going on here? Okay, well, we did that one, right? Okay, here's marriage. Marriage. The state has claimed the authority to define which relationships qualify as marriage, based not on the facts of biology, but only on its own say-so. Parenthood. Up until now, who counts as a child's legal parents was based on biological relationship. The woman who gave birth was the mother, and her legal husband was presumed to be the child's biological father. This is called the presumption of parentage. But in same-sex couples, at least one parent is not biologically related to the child. So until recently, that person's name did not go on the birth certificate. They could adopt, of course, but that's a long, expensive process, and same-sex parents wanted to be treated exactly like opposite-sex parents. Anything else they said is discrimination. And in a 27 decision, the Supreme Court agreed. It gave the non-biological spouse the same presumption of parenthood, which means the state has claimed the right, the authority, to redefine parenthood without regard to biology, but based only on its own say-so. Finally, until recently, gender identity followed naturally, organically, from your biological sex. But the only way the law can treat a transgender woman the same as a biological woman, transgender woman meaning someone born male, the same as a biological woman, is to dismiss biology as irrelevant. And in its Bostock decision, the Supreme Court ruled in 2020 that sex in Title VII really means gender. The law will now recognize only gender and not your sex. So what's the principle in all these cases? Many pre-political rights are rooted in biology. So when the law no longer recognizes biology, the state redefines those rights. So the sexual revolution is dramatically increasing the power of the state. Final strategy. Christians have a reputation for being negative, for saying, don't do it, it's wrong, it's a sin, and there's something wrong with you. Notice the positive language I've been using. We're called to honor our body, to respect our biological sex, to live in harmony with the Creator's design. When the psalmist says, the heavens declare the glory of God, that includes our sexuality. It is part of the created order that is declaring the glory of God. This is an astonishingly high view of the physical world. There's nothing like it in any other religion or worldview. Of course, people are much more than biological organisms, but since the body is what's being attacked in the postmodern worldview, that is what we must defend. Let me end with a story. A woman named Laura Perry transitioned to male and successfully passed as a man for 10 years. Then she converted to Christianity. And at first she thought she could continue living as a man. She said, I aspired to be a real man of God. But one day when she was praying, she seemed to hear God say to her, you cannot claim to love me and yet reject my creation. So Christians must make the positive case that biblical morality is based on loving and accepting God's creation. The Christian worldview is pro-science, pro-reality, and pro-truth. Thank you very much.